back. We hope you are all well. We are, of course, still remote. Tim out in Pasadena, and a place which, unfortunately, is mourning these days. Tim, Pasadena has lost Eddie Van Halen. How is there a big wake still going on out there?
Well, you know, the COVID notwithstanding, yeah, it's a deeply sort of felt thing right here. Eddie Van Halen went to Pasadena City College, which is like a few blocks. I can walk to Pasadena City College from where I am, and everybody who lives in Pasadena knows, the Van Halen home, as it were. And one has to imagine that there just aren't any streets of Pasadena that Eddie and his brother Alex and the Van Halen crew did not stroll way back in the early '70s when he was a young guy. As a matter of fact, if you drive past Pasadena City College, they have these big sort of awnings hanging around, and all of the famous. John Singleton has one there. John Singleton went to Pasadena City College, and one of them is Eddie Van Halen's. So anybody famous. Who became famous, who went to Pasadena College, has one of those. And Eddie's has been hanging for like 45 years. So, that's it.
I mean, it's so sad. Age 65, throat cancer. And he's been struggling for, he fought it off once and
you know what he said it was? He said, because most people assume, Eddie hard drinking, hard smoking, all that.
Yeah.
Quit drinking and smoking actually many, many years ago, more than a decade ago. Eddie said that the tongue cancer that he got was from holding metal guitar picks. He used nickel and bronze guitar picks all the time, and he used to hold them in his mouth all the time. And if you watch many videos of Eddie Van Halen on stage, he's standing there with those metal guitar picks, and he said that's exactly where his cancer developed, and he did it for 40 years.
Yeah.
And anyway, but no, it wasn't the hard drinking and smoking. He feels that the very specific sort of cancer that he got came from 40 years of holding those metal guitar picks in his mouth.
Oh man,
very odd thing, Matt. But then there it is, right?
Well, one of the great musicians, certainly of our day. I mean, he reinvented the guitar, and there's part of me that imagines that he and Prince are having a duel right now to see who can kick the licks the best up there. But,
Eddie's one of the reasons why I'm a guitar player. That, and I was a lousy drummer. So
Well, and we were talking before the show too, and I'll let you go off on this a bit. Somebody was talking about Oscar qualification this year. You had some thoughts.
Yeah. Interesting question. In an interview I was engaged in, and they asked me about that. First of all, what films? What will be the factor that decides what films qualify for an Oscar? Pretty much all films. Obviously up until March. Since March, I should say, all films have more or less been relegated to some sort of a streaming service, including many films that were meant to be theatrical. Films that we know were meant to be theatrical. A few made it into theaters. Tenet made it into some theaters in some places in North America, obviously. Lots of other films have been playing overseas in theater for several months now. And then, of course, there are the many, many films like Mulan, and Universal was the first one to pull a feature that was meant to be theatrically released and put it online. So it's a good question. I'm not sure the Academy has made any announcements about that yet. These are the criteria for a film to be considered for an Academy Award this year. And then you have all of these films that have been streaming right alongside the Mulans and whatnot on streaming platforms. Some of them damn good movies, but many of them never meant to be theatrically released films. These were films that were always meant to be Netflix films. But more or less, these films are all swimming in the same water. So what are we going to do to decide which ones are eligible for an Academy Award?
It is a vexing question, and you and I both know, since we're kind of on the vanguard of this, because doing Film Week, normally in a non-pandemic scenario, you're reviewing things that have to be theatrical openers in the city of Los Angeles, or at least in Southern California area generally. If something's opening, for a week in Riverside, well, we may still cover it if it's worth it. But now it's sort of everything is fair game. So normally you get a rundown of, okay, here are 20, 25 films that are opening theatrically that qualify. let's pick 10. Now it's a list of about 48, 50, sometimes 60 films. And you look at that, and it's like you just sort of throw your hands up, and you're like, how do I even whittle this down? Because some of this stuff, obviously, okay, the big budget Netflixy things, okay, fair enough. The studio stuff, fair enough. But then you have you have like 30 movies that if they had gone to theaters, you would have covered them, but now they're not. So you have no idea, how you're gonna break this down, and the publicists are kind of pulling their hair out too,
Yeah.
because now they don't know how to get their stuff covered. It's really it's kind of a thing. So I don't know how the Academy is going to handle it. I will say this. I have more respect, even though I'm disappointed that they're pushing off Bond, pushing off Wonder Woman. I have more respect for those than I do for Disney electing to put Soul out, the Pixar film Soul, straight to Disney Plus. That I find unbelievably upsetting. This is let's keep in mind, Soul is a Pixar film that everyone has been waiting for a year. For a year, they first started peddling that thing summer of last year with teasers, and it looked beautiful. And the everyone's waiting for it. There has never been a Pixar film, short or feature, that was not screened in movie theaters. Every single short and feature that Pixar has ever made, apart from the Pixar Spark shorts, which is a separate thing, every short, proper Pixar short and feature has screened for an audience in a theater. This will be the first one that doesn't. And I'm thinking, okay, that's upsetting in and of itself, because Pixar films are made for audiences. But this is the first Pixar character that is black, and the theme of it is that in the hereafter, in the afterlife, race goes away. Now that is a rather extraordinary and profound thing, and to my mind, that's a movie that needs to be seen by audiences. That's a movie people need to see with strangers, and talk about with strangers. That's an audience experience concept. That's not something I want to be watching at home with 2 or 3 other people that I already know and I'm related to. I mean, that's designed to bring people together. Why would Disney go out of the way to make a movie designed to bring people together and then elect to release it in a way that does not? That's what I don't get.
It's a tough situation, and we know what it is. I will say this about Disney: they announced just the other day, day before yesterday, that if henceforth they will be considering all content in the context of the streaming services that they have at hand in terms of distribution. That each individual piece of content they will be evaluating without theatrical release as a consideration in the green lighting and production and marketing and distribution of that content. They've informed their marketing groups for each of these projects in production now and being greenlit. Do not concern yourself with the idea of theatrical release for any of these things. Set your release dates, decide your marketing material, all dependent on which one of the platforms that there are a number of Disney platforms, obviously, that we have at our disposal, and take the notion of theatrical release out of the equation. So they've applied this notion to everything at Disney. They're pretending like theatrical distribution does not exist at the moment. Which is, might be rational, Wade. It might be rational.
I think it's short-term rational, but I think it's long-term destructive. I mean, I understand that Disney's real concern right now is they got to get some cash flow, because they're bleeding cash because of the theme park closures. And Bob Iger, was part of the governor's task force here in California and resigned because they can't come to an agreement as to under what conditions Disneyland can reopen. They're really angry. Disney's really angry about it. And it breaks my heart, because the live shows that my daughter loved at Disneyland, loved Mickey and the Magical Map and Frozen, Disneyland just pulled the plug on them. The casts have been let go. Millions of people will never again get to see those shows. I mean, that just breaks my heart. And I'm thinking of all the unemployed people now. They got it. Disney's it's trickling down, and a lot of people are getting hurt, and Disney's bleeding cash, and they got to do something. So I get it short term, but I think long term you got to get the theaters back open. You got to get the movies back in there because that's what people want to see. They want to see big movies on the big screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It just look. It has to be safe, and that's it's a circumstance. It's a circumstance. So, in answer to that question, I mean, I guess we didn't answer the question about the Academy Awards and who and how and
Yeah, we
what.
don't
And what.
know.
It's
Nobody
really not
knows.
possible to do that. And I think that sooner rather than later, the Academy and all of the other sort of award. And we, the Los Angeles Film
Yeah.
Critics Association, we're going to have to make a decision about
We
that.
do. We will have to, and they're gonna be marketing a ton of stuff to us, and we're gonna have to really whittle it down because just doing what we usually do. Hey, everybody, go onto the Google Docs and write down your suggestions. We're gonna have 800 movies
Yeah.
listed there. I mean, it's not going to help. Everyone's seeing different stuff, and everyone's going to suggest different stuff, and we're going to have to come up with a standard to narrow that down.
Yeah, because for us, some measure of theatrical release, in the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, obviously, was a criteria too. That's but anyway, that's all gone. So, all right, man. Anyway,
Well, let's get into it. We got a ton of stuff. We're going to try to pare down through it. The flow of product is slowly ramping back up again. And we also have an interview we're going to conclude the show with today. Lee Renee, author Lee Renee, who has written a terrific Hollywood novel called Mitzi of the Ritz. Takes place in those early movie days, early sound, late silent period. It's a wonderful novel of the studio era that really that integrates a lot of great observations and wonderful historical research. She did a great job. So we spent some time with Lee Renee, a wonderful interview that we will conclude the show with. And in the meantime, I'm gonna start off and just blow through some licensed Kino titles here.
ready, brother?
Starting with the Kino Lorber Universal Pictures collaboration here, the Reginald Denny collection. This is not Reginald Denny, more commonly known of recent years from the LA riot period. This is the silent era British actor Reginald Denny, who was kind of he's sort of fallen off the map a little bit, but Reginald Denny was sort of the suave guy. They didn't really have silent comics in England at the time, so they had sort of this British gentleman was what he kind of what he forged as his persona. Anyway, these are 3 silent films with Reginald Denny, and they are all really charming. They have audio commentaries on all 3 of them with Anthony Slide, film historian. And I think the most interesting to me is What Happened to Jones, which is really very fun. It's about a guy before he gets married. He's at a bachelor party, and they're gambling, and it gets raided, and then all hell breaks loose, and it's the aftermath of that. It's actually very fun, very clever, very funny, nicely done. So silent film buffs, Reginald Denny collection is really worth checking out. We have a bunch from Zeitgeist, who releases now through Kino. Beyond the Visible, Hilma af Klint is a really pretty rock solid documentary that revisits the importance of the as far as an artist. I don't even know how to even get into the background of this. If you're a fan of abstract art, you probably know the name of Hilma af Klint, but if you don't, it's not going to mean a whole lot. So I would say prepare yourself for it, because what it's basically saying is that Hilma was the pioneer in abstract art, and that she achieved a lot of the things and pioneered a lot of the techniques that men did afterwards and took credit for, and for all kinds of fascinating reasons. And her life and her biography is all sorted out here. They revisit this and they compare the paintings, and it's really very interesting, and they make a very persuasive case that she deserves the place in history that a lot of men have received in her stead for decades. Also from Zeitgeist, Ken Loach film Sorry We Missed You, which is one of the better Ken Loach films in a number of recent years. It is, of course, again a working class family story, centering around it's a domestic tale. It traffics in a lot of the themes that Loach always traffics in. But the people are not pegs. They are not pawns. They are real people. They're very well forged out. It has a great audio commentary with Ken Loach and his co-writing partner. And I would say if you're a Ken Loach fan, definitely check it out. If you're not really a Ken Loach fan, it's probably not your cup of tea.
Strummer was in a Ken Loach film.
Was he really?
Bread and Roses, late 90s.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, Cher was in that movie.
Oh my goodness.
Friend of ours, actor Cher. Yeah.
That's going back a ways.
Yeah.
Wow. We also have Recorder, the Marion Stokes project from Zeitgeist.
Oh, I love that movie.
That is a really brave movie. I mean, it's kind of a crazy risk, right?
I remember watching her on PBS. Those PBS shows that she would do aired in St. Louis when I was a kid. And
she recorded television all day, every day for years.
One of the first women, one of the first people to own a Betamax and VHS machines. She was also one of the first investors, believe it or not, in Steve Jobs and Apple. She married this rich guy later in her life, but then
which is fascinating because she started as a communist.
And it was like this interracial couple, and this whole thing. So such an interesting. But she had this obsessive disorder that led to this documentary.
A little bit on the spectrum. I would say too. But yeah, the funny thing is, it all begins with the Iranian hostage crisis, and then she just records literally everything, and it all winds up on 70,000 tapes. And what an amazing, fascinating, wild adventure that is. Lightning Over Braddock, a Rust Bowl fantasy, and collected shorts. The Films of Tony Bubba. That's a mouthful. So it's 2 discs. And this is a little bit in the same vein with Recorder. So Tony Bubba is a guy from Braddock, Pennsylvania, who for 50 years basically has created. He's sort of the archivist of his town, his hometown, and it's kind of depressing and funny all at the same time. He's a really fascinating character, and he made these shorts, and he's just a chronicler. He's like a filmmaking version of a street photographer, is maybe the best way to put it. So anyway, this is on 2 discs. This is Lightning Over Braddock from 1988. Braddock Chronicles 1 contains everything he did from 1972 to 1980. And then Braddock Chronicles 2 on disc 2 is everything from 1981 to 85. And then there are various shorts from, the 80s to the present after that. This is 6 hours of Braddock, Pennsylvania history where, factories close, and it's sort of a history of how the industrial East has declined. But at the same time, it's also an amazing piece of filmmaking and just a unique individual style. It's really a fascinating movie. So I don't know that I recommend this to everybody because it's obviously not everybody's taste, but Lightning Over Braddock, a Rust Bowl fantasy and collected shorts, The Films of Tony Bubba, Buba. If it sounds like your cup of tea, check it out. Something Weird and Kino Classics have been releasing a lot of great old exploitation films, and the old marijuana and sex cautionary hygiene movies that were so that we kind of look at now and laugh a little bit about. Anyway, we've got volumes 4 through 7 now of this whole fascinating series, and they're all kind of double features. The titles speak for themselves, so let me start off with 4. 4 has Dwayne Esper's Narcotic. Dwayne Esper, we of course talked about in our film Schlock that you and I worked on, Ray Green's film. Dwayne Esper's Narcotic, as well as Marijuana, Huana, Weed with Roots in Hell. That's on that, and I know you're loving this. And then then on volume 5 is Tomorrow's Children, a drama of human sterilization, along with Child Bride. And the series that these are part is the Forbidden Fruit series. Forbidden Fruit, the golden age of the exploitation picture. It's a big mouthful. That's the Forbidden Fruit series. Volume 6 is she should have said no.
You have to say it just like that.
She should have said no! Exclamation point. And then in parentheses, wild weed.
I
It's
love it.
so classic. It's so priceless.
Oh, my.
And then the other one is the devil's sleep. And then in parentheses, hopped up.
Yeah, man. They really had it in. They really had it in for Ganja Man.
Expose of the pet pill racket.
Oh man.
And then the last one. This is my favorite. Test tube babies and guilty parents. And they even put the artwork they put here is the great. It's all fabulous. It's like, no one under high school age admitted. Well, back in the day, the only reason they put a sign up there that said no one under high school age admitted was to make sure that you filled it up with high school kids.
Get them in there. That film's from 1948, man. That is just wow.
It's crazy. It's just, it's again, this stuff was serious at the time.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun to look at now. It's so funny. It just kills me. And then real quickly, a whole bunch of relatively newish stuff from Kino Lorber. These are all kind of, it's indie stuff. Some of it is from, like Metrograph and a few others. It's all worth kind of checking out. I'll go through it pretty quickly here. The Mountain is Rick Alverson's psychosurgical odyssey. This was made by Kino Lorber with Vice Pictures, Vice Studios, Ty Sheridan and Jeff Goldblum in it. This is kind of a. It's set in the 1950s. It's sort of surreal. It's a little bit experimental. It's worth checking out for Jeff Goldblum. Mm-hmm. Susan Sontag's Duet for Cannibals. I wouldn't necessarily recommend to anybody unless you're a Sontag fan. This is from Metrograph Pictures. It's strictly for Sontag buffs. She's very, very acquired taste. Jean-Michel Basquiat in Downtown 81, which is a great little time capsule. One of the few cases where you'll actually see him proper in a movie, and tons of great music on this, and appearances here by young Debbie Harry and Amos Poe and Debbie Mazur, and it's a great step back in time and kind of what an enigmatic, fascinating figure Basquiat was.
Yeah, and that film you're looking at, that film came out in 2000, so it was a precursor to a number of great Radiant Child. Yeah, that film's wow. And 3 or 4 Basquiat sort of docs that have come out since then that are sort of interesting. Yeah, really great stuff.
Kind of a cool interracial Western set in the 1880s. 1,000 Pieces of Gold.
Oh, yeah.
This is from Indie Collect, and really an old-fashioned, wonderful kind of classic film with a wonderful, wonderful lead performance by Rosalind Chow. Rosalind Chow and Chris Cooper together in this. It looks beautiful. It's an old-fashioned movie, and I think it's really delightful. It has a great audio commentary with Nancy Kelly and producer Kenji Yamamoto.
Love that movie.
It's a great movie. Movies that sort of get into some of the little cultural nuances of the Western period that we often forget were a reality. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Nancy Kelly directed that movie. Yeah, good movie.
It's good. Azazel Jacobs made a movie called Mama's Man, which came out some years ago. This was 2000. I want to say 2010. Feels like 2008. 2008. A little bit creepy. I had to review this at the time. It's basically about an older man with a midlife crisis who's a big overgrown mama's boy, and it's a little creepy. Yeah. But it's got its weird little indie moments. The World is Full of Secrets. Kind of. It's not a horror film. It's just a weird movie about girls telling scary stories to each other, and then it kind of sort of becomes more of a psychological thriller. It's experimental in many respects. Also has an audio commentary by the director Graham Swan. It's as far as indie films with very few low budgets go, it's not bad. The Good Times Kid, also by Azazel Jacobs with Diaz and Gerardo Naranjo. Um, Again, more of Jacob's kind of super minimalist filmmaking here. It's low budget. It's better than Mama's Man. It's by, I don't know, marginally. It was made a few years earlier. Um, kind of a story of desperate street people, but through a comedic lens, kind of, people on the margins, and trying to sort of find the humanity in people who sort of can't find a way of belonging anywhere. um, in some respects, it's been compared to a Jim Jarmusch movie. Jim Jarmusch and Aki Kaurismäki are
Mm-hmm.
the filmmakers is most often compared to. I I would say, if you like, this is how it goes. If you like Mama's Man, you'll like The Good Times Kid. But if you don't like Mama's Man, you'll probably still be okay with The Good Times Kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then last little batch here before I turn it over to Tim. These are all films from Menemsha Films, who also distributes through Kino. Menemsha, that's MENEMSHA films.com. You can get more information on the company. One of them is the German film How About Adolf? Now, this is a little peculiar to me because this story, it very quickly occurred to me as I was watching it. I was like, wait a minute, I saw a French film. There was this exact same story,
Yeah.
and it didn't give everything away in the title. The French film was called What's in a Name, and so I I'm going to recommend the French version over this one, to be honest, which is much funnier because the French are funny people. As someone who is half German, got to tell you, we're not funny people. There are some very funny German comedies. I'm not going to deny it, but for the most part, German comedy, kind of a contradiction in terms, a little bit oxymoronic. And this isn't quite modulated as well as it should be. So I did not realize that the German film existed. So even though the French film is technically a remake, I'm going to suggest you go with the French film. Um, and then let's see, The Last Supper by Florian Frerichs. I remember when this came out, and I didn't particularly care for it at the time. I kind of have come around to it. This is about a dinner, a family dinner, a German Jewish family that has a dinner on the day that Hitler comes to power, and it's a little bit like My Dinner with Andre, set during a really, really desperate moment in time.
Yeah.
It felt a little didactic to me at the time. Revisiting it now, I'm a little bit more inclined to be
I
favorable
always loved
for it.
that movie, but yeah, but then again, Wallace Shawn and stuff
Oh,
like
My Dinner with Andre?
yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Which I've also come around on. I used to think it was super pretentious, but I've come around on it a little bit. I guess, you get older, you're willing to deal with that. An Act of Defiance. This is also from Menemsha Films. Act of Defiance takes place in South Africa in 1963. Basically, centering around Nelson Mandela is a character in this, and it's looking at a particular moment in time, and a particular series of political events that transpired relative to apartheid and all of that. It's a very, very good film. I don't know why it isn't more famous sort of internationally, but it's really worth checking out, especially if you are. And you know what's fascinating too? Um, I had not realized apartheid didn't actually come to pass until well after World War II.
Oh, really? I did not know that either.
I think it was like 48 or 49, something like that. There was no apartheid in South Africa going back in the 1920s, 30s. That period, World War II, didn't
I
exist.
did not know that. That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I always was under the impression that apartheid,
Was
was
just
like,
like
oh yeah,
yeah, baked into
too,
the
baked into it. No,
yeah.
it's a 20th century innovation after the Afrikaners got power from the English down there. The Afrikaners introduced it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway, Budapest Noir by Ava Gardos is a wonderful, cool, kind of hip, modern noir. It's a Hungarian movie. It takes place just on the eve of World War II. And Hungarian movies are so quirky. If you've ever been to Hungary, you understand why. It's a very it's a it's a society with a lot of baggage, let's just put it that way, and when they bake that into their art and their music, it's really really interesting. So check it out. It's like a classic American noir and a classic German expressionist silent film, all wrapped into one, and it's beautifully photographed. It's a really cool story, and with some great little political edges to it, commenting on the not only on Hungary in 1936, but on what it would become in the Cold War era. And then an amazing first film here by a filmmaker named Sivia Barkai Yakov. This is an Israeli film called Red Cow, and it's really a very, very interesting debut film. It's it's very allegorical, and it's all about this girl and her. You know, she has red hair, and her father has a calf, which he actually assigns all kinds of religious significance to. He sees the calf not just as a calf, but kind of a symbol of all kinds of religious issues. And there are all of these weird family issues that are wrapped up in the hair and the calf. And when you dig kind of underneath the surface, you find a lot of really really interesting comments on Israeli society, and it is it's a very very interesting film, Red Cow. And then Crescendo is the last one here I'm going to talk about. Crescendo is also a very very fine film. This is a German movie. Not funny, thank goodness. That centers around a conductor, um, who and he's going to put. Oh, I don't want to give it away. There's a particular orchestra that he's going to put together, and it's a problem to a lot of people that he wants to have an orchestra of this particular composition, and it is significant. It's got all kinds of historical and cultural and sort of other aspects to it. So, but it's this youth orchestra he wants to put together, and there's a lot of pushback, and obviously a lot of drama that entails with the various individuals that are a part of it. It's some beautiful music, very intense filmmaking, good solid film. It's called Crescendo by a director named Dror Zahavi. So there it is.
Ah.
It's a bunch of cool stuff from Kino this week. And I might have some more. Tim, what else are we gonna hit?
Well, let's do some relatively speaking new cinema. If you feel
Okay.
like it, we'll knock off a few of those that I have sort of lined up. Beginning with one that happens to be about a pandemic. It's called Before the Fire. And it's about a pandemic. A global pandemic hits. This young woman decides she's an actress, and she's gonna skip it back to her rural home there in the middle of nowhere. And she gets back there, and some dude who she used to date from back in the day decides that he's gonna take a shot at her again. And and she should have stayed. She should have stayed in L.A. with the pandemic. Is basically what this movie says, because this guy's an a-hole. Wicked little movie, though. I rather enjoyed it. So Before the Fire 2020. You let me know, Wade, if any of these happen to have anything particularly interesting.
Will do.
In terms of and then I really did dig this. I saw this one, Batman: Death in a Family. It's pretty good.
It's not bad.
It's an interactive one. So basically, what you can do is you can decide which direction the character that would be Robin, Jason, Todd, Red Hood, Red Light, which way his character goes, and that's kind of cool. I kind of dug that.
Yeah. It's not bad. It reminded me a little bit of what was the old kind of Don Bluth animated video game, Dragon's Lair? Dragon's Lair, that old video game. It had a little. I felt like I was playing that again, except in a Batman world. But yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah, great movie anyway. Bruce Greenwood does the voice of Bruce Wayne Batman in this series, and Gary Cole does the voice of Two-Face. So great voice, great voice actors in that series. Then there is this musical version of Valley Girl that came out last year. I didn't see it then. And when I at first I didn't realize that it was a musical because I got really really pissy because I'm like, why in the world would you remake Valley Girl? It's perfect, particularly when it's set in the 80s anyway. Well, what they do here, it's a musical, and it's using all that new wave music and all of that kind of stuff. Of course, all that music was in the movie in the first place, but it was just on the radio. Nevertheless, they did a musical version Rachel Lee Goldenberg, the young director here, of Valley Girl, an iconic movie from people of our generation, John Hughes film. Although I do understand that we're supposed to take a look at most of those John Hughes films, many of those John Hughes films through a more sophisticated,
Well, a historical lens.
yeah. So which is fine,
Yeah.
I suppose we can do that, but I don't really want to. David Ayer made this movie called The Tax Collector.
Oh yeah, it's a steel book too. I should
Yeah,
point that out. This is a really nice steel book. David Ayer, of course, did
I wrote End of Watch, Suicide
Suicide Squad.
Squad, Hard
Yeah,
Times,
yeah,
and so a couple of those. So it's a steelbook, Wicked.
yeah. It's really cool. It's a real nice steel book. Bobby Soto and Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf going full hard in this. He's kind of trying to be an action star, and it kind of works, to be honest. Um, Yeah, it's David Ayer, I think, going as deep as he's gone, and as raw as he's gone, probably since Training Day.
Yeah,
Which of course he didn't direct,
he
but
wrote.
he wrote,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's a nice steelbook.
And End of Watch, my favorite David Ayer movie so far, as that's concerned. But anyway, kind of cool. That Cutthroat City, RZA, direct
Oh, RZA.
directing this movie. RZA, hey man, if you figure out how to go from Wu-Tang Clan and in the streets of Brooklyn and the Bronx, and here 30 years later you're a major director, or a director anyway.
Andy, and I always like to mention Andy Klein,
Yeah,
our good friend and colleague Andy Klein. Andy Klein did an audio commentary with RZA for I forget what film it was. It wasn't something RZA had done, but they were pulled in to do an audio commentary for some martial arts movie together.
oh,
To
that
this
makes
day,
sense. That makes sense.
Andy had the time of his life. And I've done commentaries with Andy, and he never has the time of his life with me. But man, he said he just had such a blast with RZA. RZA made the whole thing so fun,
Yeah.
so much fun.
Him and RZA, they would both know everything there is to know about.
Yeah,
The only
yeah,
other person who needed to be there was you.
yeah.
This thing is set right after Katrina. These young friends go back. Everything's wiped out down there in the Ninth Ward. They get involved with this guy who wants to pull off a heist to try to set their financial situation right. Look, the cast of this thing is hell of a cast. You got Ethan Hawke, you got Wesley Snipes, you got Isaiah Washington, Terrence Howard.
Holy cow!
You got Joel David Moore in this movie. You got Rob Morgan in this movie. You got T.I. in this movie. You got Denzel Whitaker in this movie. Denzel Whitaker is a young actor who happened to be in an acting class that I used to teach some 10 or 15 years ago when I was teaching over at that school.
No kidding.
Yeah, named after Denzel Washington, and played his first role, one that I actually coached him for, was in Denzel Washington's film, the Great Debate.
No
He
kidding.
played Denzel Washington's son in that movie, which was kind of weird because Denzel was casting a kid named Denzel. But anyway, Denzel in the movie. So this is a really wicked cast in this movie. I mean, and it's a fairly interesting movie set in right after Katrina. It's a good, solid, well constructed heist movie. RZA, acquits himself fairly well.
I got one here. The Secret Garden, the latest version of the Secret
Oh my
Garden,
God.
which I don't think is absolutely necessary. I still prefer the
Uh,
more recent, the previous one from the 90s.
They
Um,
go back to the 40s. I think Margaret O'Brien
yeah,
did
this
one of those.
that's what's a little weird about this. I mean, I kind of get it. I think it sort of works. They move the story into the 1940s so that the Indian angle of it can be a little bit politically connected to the Indian to Indian independence and Gandhi and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The war with Pakistan, but I'm not sure that it really changes the story all that much because the story takes place in England, but it's charming. I wish it were a little bit more charming, but it's kind of hard to go wrong with the story of kids and magic and friendship and all of the little ins and outs. Colin Firth plays the grumpy dad. But yeah, it's yet another version of the Secret Garden. I'd say stick with the old black and white version and the one from the 90s.
Yeah.
Before you go to this one, but you can't go wrong. It's on Blu-ray, and it's got digital code on it. Although, because this is Universal, I would have expected it to be movies anywhere, and I find it sort of curious that it is not.
American Pie presents
Yeah.
Girls rule. 20 years worth of American Pie films now, folks, if you're wondering. And I got to tell you, the Rotten Tomato scores go down actually as the more of these movies. But the cool thing about this one, despite the fact that it's directed by a boy, directed by Mike Elliott, is that it's the girls doing all of the ludicrous things the boys did, Stickler and company, in those original American Pie movies. These almost always come with some really cool stuff on those DVD releases. Man, is this a Blu-ray?
It is not. It is a strictly DVD, and I find it really fascinating who shows up in this thing too. I mean, I did not watch it, but I'm just looking at the cast right now. I mean, Barry Bostwick. No, is Barry Bostwick in this thing? That's
Yeah,
just utterly good. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
Okay.
He's in the Eugene Levy role.
Okay.
You know,
Good grief.
it's just
All right.
a lot of swapping
Wow.
of the.
That's crazy.
Cats and Dogs 3, Paws Unite. So we're into the third one of the Cats and Dogs movies. I suppose
Oh my
there's a
goodness.
certain amount of charm in these films, or they wouldn't keep making them. But again, the Rotten Tomatoes score goes down exponentially every time they make one. But there it is. Again, another Cats and Dogs movie. Some decent voice talent in the film, and I suppose it's funny if you're into the whole. If you have a kid and they've been in the house for the last 6 months. Hit them with another Cats and Dogs movies. See what happens. I think that would probably be okay.
The Doorman.
Yeah.
Did you see the Doorman?
No, I don't remember that one.
Dorman is Dorman's not
That's
bad actually.
Reno and Ruby Rose.
Yeah, Jean Reno and Ruby Rose. It's not bad actually. Ruby Rose, of course, just walked off of Batwoman.
Yeah.
After one season, which I don't really understand. That was going to turn her life around.
Well,
I guess
she got injured pretty bad, and she was
that injury freaked her out.
Yeah, and I guess that can happen.
Yeah, but anyway, she's going for the action girl thing here, and I hope it happens for her because she's a sharp actress and she's got a great presence. She plays a Marine who is a former Marine who's now just working as a doorwoman at a New York City high-rise apartment building. And it goes a little bit die-hard there at a certain point when suddenly these art thieves show up, led by Jean Reno, who's going full heavy here. And there you go. The whole thing is very, very focused, and it's kind of cool to see what would normally be a mano be a woman movie, and she holds it down really, really well. I mean, it's something clearly I would say that was probably written for a man, and at some point somebody said, "Hey, why not Ruby Rose? Could we do it as a vehicle for Ruby Rose, just like they did? Originally Salt was supposed to be a Tom Cruise vehicle, and then they redid that for Angelina Jolie."
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said, "Yeah, sure, why the hell not?" And I think good for them. I love that they can pivot these things. So I'm guessing there. I don't think this was originally a female role, but they certainly make it work as one.
This little movie here, the Secret, Dare to Dream, which is about
another one of the secret movies.
Yeah,
and
this is an Andy Tennant film.
No kidding.
Yeah, and the Hitch, the Sweet Home Alabama, Ever After Cinderella, Fool's Gold, the Andy Tennant, big movies, back in the day. But nevertheless, anyway, this is about this woman who she's a widow, and she meets this guy who subscribes to this sort of philosophy of positive thinking. Katie Holmes in this movie, Josh Lucas, Jerry O'Connell, again, a decent cast in this movie, and directed by Andy Tennant. So I don't know if you're into. I suppose these films strike a chord with a certain group of people. Anything on there like a I don't know. Commentary or anything like that? No.
Not really. No, I'm looking at there's like a featurette. That's it. Nothing else.
Interesting. Those movies are always, I don't know, but they have it. But Andy Tennant, that's an Andy Tennant film, dude.
Crazy.
But
well, he's still there. Good for him. He's still working.
Yeah. I guess you can say that about it.
I've got the movie here called The Honeymoon Phase from Dark Sky Films, which is really, really fascinating and more than a little disturbing. Actually, it makes me want to kind of go full analog in the house. It does. This is kind of it's not really a science fiction film, but it's kind of science fiction-esque. It's about a couple that is promised $50,000 to become part of this study, this project
Oh, the
called
one
the
where they have
Millennium.
to live in the house.
That's it. They got to live in this smart house, and it's an experiment, like to study the effect of smart house technology on couples and how it affects the relationship and whatnot. But of course, it wouldn't be a movie if they just had a really great time and got paid $50,000 and went about their way. So of course, everything goes south in a hard way, and it takes some really nasty turns, but. It's really, really well done. It's incredibly well done. It feels like something that M. Night Shyamalan probably should have done at one
Mm.
point in his career, but it's too late now.
Interesting. The silent scene. I think I saw this film for Film Week. As a matter of fact, it was one that made it into the theaters just before we stopped doing the show in
Yeah.
studio. Anyway, it's about this guy. He's this hunter, sort of a reformed hunter, actually, a bit of an alcoholic. And years and years and years ago, his daughter went missing. Since then, he's been very much against hunting, and he takes care of this reserve and stops folks from poaching on this reserve. Young women start going missing in this
Oh yeah.
and it's very possible that whoever is doing this might have kidnapped his daughter years ago. He gets involved with this female deputy, and they go off and try to figure out what the hell is going on with all this kind of stuff. Fairly intense little thriller, well constructed and well acted, and pretty creepy. A couple of interesting little twists at the back end of it. So I could go ahead and recommend that movie.
Tell me whether or not you think this is a correct statement. I kind of feel like Nikolai Coster-Waldau
Yeah, who of
is
course
the
was in Game of Thrones for you.
yes. I kind of feel like with movies like this, he is forging himself a career as the new Joe Estevez.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
The new Joe Estevez.
yeah. For those who don't know, Joe Estevez is Martin Sheen's older brother,
Yeah.
who's not a particularly great actor. He's
No.
not a bad actor,
No.
but he never became a movie star. He just became kind of a B movie guy who
Yeah.
did lots and lots of action movies where he'd grow a beard
The
and pick up
Frank
a gun and
Frank Stallone of his.
yeah, there you go. The Frank Stallone of the Estevez. Yeah, this I just watched this. I was like, you know what? 25 years ago, this is a Joe Estevez movie. Just is. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it, but there it is.
He fancies himself a James Bond type, but I think
Yeah. Well.
for that. What else we got? I was gonna
Oh,
start.
I got one here. So we got Techno Lust by
Okay.
Lynn Hershman Leeson. This is a Tilda Swinton movie from Strand. It is definitely from. It's a little bit weird. It's also got Karen Black and Jeremy Davies in it, which tells you just how weird it is. If you're going to put Tilda Swinton, Karen Black, and Jeremy Davies in a movie, you're not going for naturalism.
No.
Yeah, no, this is another kind of a weird avant-garde thing about a woman who has three kind of self-replicating android versions of herself. So Tilda Swinton gets to play four parts, and they're all, I shouldn't say androids, they're clones, but they're not clones. You know what I mean? They're their own thing anyway. Um, Actually, a better way to put this is like Tilda Swinton doing a remake of Multiplicity without Michael Keaton's jokes,
Oh,
without the jokes, without the
that
comedy.
would be
There you go.
unfortunate.
That's a better way to put it. Anyway, it's kind of weird and very Blade Runnery, and it touches on a lot of those same kind of Phil K. Dick concepts, and that's what makes it interesting. Is that it's the ideas it deals with. There's not so much of a story to it as it is that it sort of wallows in a lot of very interesting speculative ideas.
Mm.
And Tilda Swinton is always great to look at. She does such interesting things as an actress, even when you think in the hands of any other actor, that would just be stupid and I would never buy it and I would be sitting here laughing while I ate popcorn. And yet Tilda Swinton does it and you just kind of sit there and you get a chill up your spine and you just think, wow, that was kind of amazing. It's it's a testament to her as an actress. She can
True,
just elevate
all the way
material.
back to Orlando. All the way back to
Yeah,
Orlando.
that's for sure. For sure.
This is a neat little one. The burnt orange heresy is about an art heist sort of situation. This guy's an art dealer. He gets hired by this person to distill this work of art from this extremely this well known but extremely sort of J.D. Salinger-esque enigmatic sort of painter person. And it's about greed and all kinds of wicked cool things. The thing I like about this movie most, though, is that Mick Jagger shows up in it. Mick Jagger Mick used to show up in a lot of movies. Mick starred in a few movies over the course.
Quite a few,
Long
and
rock and roll
he's
career.
really he's kind of grown into a really interesting place too.
Yeah, he's sort of quiet and interesting. So I got the only time that I ever met Mick Jagger was for a terrible movie that he made back in the '90s called Free Jack or something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember Free
That
Jack.
terrible sort of movie. I mean, anyway, he came to the junket, which blew me away. I'm like, but he was, that's when he was trying to be taken seriously as an actor. So one of those kind of things. What else have we got here? Under the How to
Wait,
Build a Girl. I see here, which is an
yeah,
interesting film.
that's from the novel, the Caitlin Moran novel, right? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Beanie Feldstein.
yeah. Sort of interesting film. You've got a teenage girl living with her family. It's set in the UK in England, and sort of grows up to become this very popular sort of music journalist. You're covering all of the music of the period, which shows up inside this movie. Patty Constantine, again, a great cast here. Patty Constantine is in this movie. Harper Perry's in this movie. Really cool little cast, neat little movie. Sort of
Beanie Feldstein's going to be a big deal.
biographical picture. I think so too.
Yeah, she's going to be a big deal. I mean, she may wind up being even bigger than her brother at some point. She's Jonah Hill's sister, for those who don't know. But yeah, I think Beanie Feldstein's going to be a real big deal. It's give her 5-6 years. I think something's really going to pop. And then let's see. Last of the new movies here I've got is The Shadow of Violence, which is fine. It's another one of those kind of gritty Irish street thug punky, the mean streets of Ireland movies.
Yeah.
These come around every once in a while. They usually deal with crime and drug dealing and despair and alcoholism, and they're not really great advertisements for tourism to Ireland, but they 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 pack a punch, and this one certainly does as well. Yeah, it's the guy. They're always ex-boxers too. You ever notice that? It's always like some guy used to be a boxer, can't make money as a boxer, so now I'm going to be a hitman or a bag man or whatever the case is. Anyway, this movie is Shadow of Violence, and if you just want to see Irish people curse at each other and be really brutal, it's definitely your thing. Tim, I got a few other classic ones here. I'm going to talk about a few Criterions.
Okie dokie.
You know what's on Criterion?
Oh,
Finally,
well,
I mean, I never expected it would wind up on Criterion. Claudine.
oh
Claudine is on
wow,
Criterion.
James Earl Jones, the exquisite Diana Carroll.
How amazing is that? I never expected somebody would put Claudine on Criterion, but good for them.
Yeah.
What a wonderful movie. This is Diane Carroll is just extraordinary. She was Oscar nominated for the part in 1974. It's funny. This was on some streaming platform. Gosh, it might have been Criterion. I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, but it was the first time that I had seen it in a very, very long time. And it's amazing how it just captures that moment. It captures the 70s.
Yeah.
Like it really, really crystallizes the 70s, the grain of the film and everything else. But yeah, it's basically Diane Carroll playing the title part. Single mom, 6 kids, living in Harlem, and having a relationship with this amazing James Earl Jones character who plays a garbage man.
Yeah.
I mean, and it somehow winds up being like magical.
Yeah.
Just those two talents together, it's magical. It's incredible.
A lot of wicked people came out of that movie too.
Yeah, audio commentary from 2003 with James Earl Jones and Diane Carroll and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs and George Tillman Jr. even weighs in. It's pretty great. And I didn't know this either, but Dan Pine, screenwriter Dan Pine, current screenwriter Dan Pine, who was an instructor at UCLA when I was there, his parents wrote this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Amazing. I know. I had no idea. So I didn't realize he was a second generation until I got this. So anyway, really beautiful movie directed by John Barry. It's a really beautiful film. Lots of extras on here. So, including a new conversation with film programmer Ashley Clark and Robert Townsend.
Oh
So,
wow, yeah, great.
very cool.
Robert Townsend, great.
Um, Tim, I'm sorry we're not seeing each other because I had to pass this off to you and let you explain it to me. Because we also have a new version, a new Criterion release on Blu-ray of Pierrot Le Fou, the Godard film. This was his 10th film, and it's still sort of normal Godard, but Tim understands Godard to a degree that I don't.
Oh,
He's much more forgiving.
I just enjoy it a little bit more. That's all.
I mean, it's Anna Karina and Belmondo, and they're both great, and Raoul Coutar's photography is fantastic, but the jokes don't make sense to me in this. I swear, I just don't understand when Godard tries to be funny.
And you speak French.
And I speak French, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, that ain't funny. It ain't funny, bro. Yeah, I know you're trying to be funny and make some kind of satirical comment on capitalism and consumerism, but it ain't funny. I don't get it. Claire Denis' Beau Travail, also out on Criterion from 1999. Just Claire Denis is one of our great treasures. This is an absolutely beautiful remake of Billy Budd, Claire Denis style, and it's basically centers around a group of French Foreign Legion guys in Djibouti. It's really, really beautifully shot. It's incredibly intense.
Oh man, it's about jealousy and all kinds. It's just so powerful.
It's just so powerful. And then Francesco Rossi's Christ Stopped at Eboli, which is 4 hours long. I want to remind people this is 4 hours long. And very, very political, very, very much an Italian film of its moment, which is in the late 70s, when you had late 60s to the late 70s. There was a lot of reflecting on the fascist period and a lot of anger, and people whose parents and grandparents were either part of the government or suffered because of it. So a lot of that residue from World War II and the fascist period is seeped into the 60s and 70s. And Rossi decided to just vent for 4 hours with this thing, and basically it takes place during Mussolini in a particularly depressed part of rural Italy, and it's a powerful film, but man, it never ends. It just goes on and on and on. A lot of great extras here, including a new interview with translator and author Michael Moore. Different Michael Moore, I should point out, and then a documentary from 1978 about this particular school of cinema, the Italian political cinema and anti-fascist cinema and all that stuff. So a lot of great extras on here. Really cool stuff. Let's see. 10 Little Indians, which has been done a billion times. Tim, did you ever see the 1974 version of 10 Little Indians?
It's among my favorite.
I had never seen the 74 version of it, and it's pretty great. It's really, really kind of cool. I'm not even sure I even knew this existed. Oliver Reed and Elke Summer, Richard Attenborough, Herbert Lom. This is just a really cool kind of James Bondian cast, and it is a great take on it. I mean, Charles Aznavour from France, and who even shows up in this? Orson freaking Welles.
Yeah,
it's a fun movie. It's a fun movie. A few other quick ones here. Five Corners with Jodie Foster and Tim Robbins and John Turturro. This was this is from MVD Visual, and Liberation Hall is the company. Tony Bill, who has directed very few movies, directed this.
Oh yeah,
it's a pretty good Tony Bill movie. I think he did this right after he did My Bodyguard, but it's not bad. It didn't really get a lot of attention, but
middle 80s, a little crimey sort of middle 80s, right? Something like that. 85, 88.
Yeah. It's something like that. Yeah, it's like mid 80s, maybe early 90s. But
John Patrick Stanley, though,
it's a sharp. Yeah, that's right, John Patrick Stanley. It's a sharp little movie. We also have a version of Wuthering Heights that I had never seen before with Richard Burton and Patty Duke.
I don't know.
Utterly Bizarre, produced by David Susskind for television. Aired in 1958. Kind of weird. I don't think it really works, but that's also from Liberation Hall. That's on DVD only. And then the last two little off ones here. One is from the Film Detective Special Edition of The Sin of Nora Moran, which has been completely restored from the original negative. This is a 1933 film that is kind of lost to a lot of people, and it has a documentary all about the making of it. In case you need a little bit of backstory. This is basically about a woman who is wrongly convicted of a crime. and they use that injustice to dovetail into kind of a surreal, dreamlike, avant-gardist movie, which in 1933 is quite a thing, and it's really worth checking out. I don't know if it's a great film, but it's certainly a significant film, and um, it's inspired a lot of people. So they restored this at the UCLA Film and Television Archives from the original negatives, and it is the Sin of Nora Moran. Anybody looking for cool early avant-garde experimental cinema will certainly find a lot to appreciate in it. And then Bruce Lee, not Lee, but Lee,
Mhm,
Li,
mhm.
stars in Dynamo, which is one of those cheap Bruce Lee knockoffs that happened after the death of Bruce Lee, when there were just a ton of Bruces and a ton of Lees,
Yeah.
and none of them were actually going to fool anybody. Um, Two different cuts of this thing in here. It's not very good, but it is certainly a novel peculiarity, and VCI has put that out through MVD distributors as well. A few interesting extras on here, including an audio commentary by a guy named Michael Worth, who's really, he wrote the Bruce Exploitation Bible, which is all about these movies that exploited Bruce Lee's death, and he has a few interesting observations there as well. So yeah, it's cool.
Cool. I was going to knock off
Do
a little bit of TV.
Let's do it.
Particularly some of the stuff that I saw and rather enjoyed. For instance, Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. So Penny Dreadful, City of Angels was the, I guess, third reincarnation of the Penny Dreadful series. This time set in the 30s here in Los Angeles. That's the first thing I loved about it. Both that and Perry Mason. The sort of reimagining of Perry Mason were set in Los Angeles in the 30s, and both of them got it really, really right in terms of the sort of look and feel of the city and what was going on in the city at the time. At the center of this, it's the extension of the 110 freeway up through Pasadena. A good chunk of the show is set in Pasadena. A good chunk of the show is set on my street in Pasadena, as a matter of fact, round and about. And you see this sort of community and the things that are going on in the background. Mostly what's interesting is that the sort of Latinx culture and all of the things that were going on in the late 30s with respect to Mexican American citizens of Mexican descent, and the rest of the sort of city government, gentrification still a thing that was going on. The erasure of certain Latin communities in order to build this freeway, and that would go on deep into the 60s.
Oh yeah,
The place where Dodger Stadium
Chavez Ravine.
sits
Yeah,
right there.
yeah.
That was a Mexican community. So this went on for 35, 40 years, and of course the backdrop of it, in the backdrop of it all, being the whole sort of Penny Dreadful, Mexican American, Day of the Dead lore, and Nazis. They managed to work
Yeah.
into this version of Penny Dreadful, which I thought was sort of interesting too, because the Nazi regime was sort of building up at the time. Anyway, I thought it was a pretty well crafted Penny Dreadful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Nathan Lane, great, fantastic work, and it was a chance to see a whole lot of really great young Mexican American actors in zoot suits and kind of doing the thing that they do. Anything interesting come with that?
Yeah, a few things. There's an introduction to it, and then a few featurettes, which are more significant than the usual featurette. So it's got some pretty good behind the scenes and background stuff. Yeah, it's not bad.
And I also dug Castle Rock, which was a series that aired on Hulu, which actually sort of drew together. And my wife was a gigantic Stephen King fan. I bought her
Oh, I remember all those books,
all those books,
all the
bought them
books.
all in hardback for her. Still got them right up.
Yeah.
And so she sort of what he's done is sort of aggregate a number of characters and stories. Pretty much all Stephen King novels are set in or around Castle Rock. And so he aggregates a bunch of those stories into this very interesting a series that stars Andre Holland. Andre Holland, we know as one of the central characters in Barry Jenkins' film Moonlight. Andre was the adult version of the guy that he goes back and meets at the diner.
Yeah,
that's Andre. Just a wonderful actor, Lizzie Chaplin in the series, I should say. So I thoroughly enjoyed Castle Rock. So fans of Stephen King will probably dig that. There was this incredibly disappointing series called Double Cross that only did one season anyway, one episode in one season. And look, it's a great idea for a series. It's this brother and sister What they're doing is they become aware of this group that's kidnapping and selling women into sex trafficking rings in their neighborhood, and they decide to stop that. She's a doctor, he's a cop. It's a really great idea for a series, but here's what you need: you need actors who can act and writers who can write. A good idea all by itself will not do it. You have to actually be able to execute. And man, these folks were not executing particularly well. But great idea for a series anyway. Vikings, the 6th season.
I cannot believe this has been on for 6 years.
It's just
You know,
it sort of blows me away a little bit too.
it's weird for me too because I stopped watching it after the second season,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some point somebody said to me, like a relative of ours in another state said, they put our ancestor on the show. And I'm like, what? On what show? Like, didn't even tell me what series. I just,
You
they
just
put our ancestor on
assumed
the
you
show.
were
I'm
watching
like,
Vikings.
what ancestor? What show? What are you talking about? He said on Vikings. I was like, Viking? Yeah, Rollo's on Viking. Like, okay. So, long story short, not that anybody gives a damn about my genealogy, but seriously. So, the first Duke of Normandy was a Viking named Rollo. He was a Norwegian who led a Danish fleet of Vikings. Like he became a renegade because some other Vikings burned the house and killed his dad, and he ran away and ended up falling in with the Danes. And then 20 years later, he's a chieftain. He sails up the Seine River, scares King Charles of France into giving them the Duchy of Normandy. That's how Normandy became Normandy, because the Normans or the Northmen were given that to not cause problems. Anyway, his like great grandson was William the Conqueror, and William the Conqueror's uncle was an archbishop who was a bit too pissy and got excommunicated for being too pissy about William the Conqueror, and he was banished to the island of Guernsey, where he said, screw it, and he got married, and he had like 30 kids. I'm descended from one of them. So anyway, Rollo, who was his like grandfather as well, is a bit of a legendary Viking fixture, and suddenly they stuck him on the show in a way that is completely not related to history at all. They just said, hey, let's have Rollo on the show. So there it is. And I don't know why it's in its 6th season, but there it is. Vikings, it's still around.
Yeah, Sherman loved that show too. Vikings. Death on the Nile. This is the David Suchet version of Death on the Nile. David Suchet is one of my favorite Hercules. And now Kenneth is that, and that one's coming up. So this is David Suchet. What year did that come out, man?
This is
it's not from the 90s, is it?
Let's see. It's 2003.
2003. Okay.
2003.
Just creeping up. Absolutely love David Suchet's performance in that particular film, but I still can't wait to see the Kenneth Branagh film. And again, that's one that we could talk about. How does that film? I
don't know what they're gonna do.
It's just it's meant to be seen in theaters, but what are you gonna do?
Yep, and he's shooting it in 65
mm. Exactly. So
that doesn't make any difference for TV, but there it is. You know what? I want to make a quick mention here of as long as we're on TV stuff, the Best of Cher.
Oh yes,
which is a 2-volume set from Time Life. We're gonna set this aside and try to get this into the gift guide as well when we get holiday time comes around. Black Friday, the week of Black Friday, we will be and Thanksgiving, we will be doing our annual gift guide, and it'll be a little bigger of a deal this year. This is 9 DVDs with everything that Cher has ever done on it. Well, not really, but pretty close too. It's like 10 episodes of her TV show. All of her TV specials from the 70s, Las Vegas concerts, a documentary called Dear Mom Loves Cher, interviews, all kinds of clips from other shows. It's just, it's 9 DVDs filled with Cher. Now, that might sound like overkill to a lot of people, but a lot of people out there love Cher. Yeah. I guarantee you, my wife and her sister being among them, because they've seen her in concert. And, that's a big deal for some people. So Time Life has loaded it up with Cher, and you can get a little bit of Sunny in here too.
So Killing Eve season 3. Anything particular interesting coming with that? I watched season 1 of Killing Eve, thoroughly enjoyed it. But sort of let it go.
Yeah, nothing really here. Just a few special features on the making of the film and stuff like that. So nothing, no, not a real big deal. Or the making of the series,
Mm.
the season, not a big deal. Just behind the scenes stuff, EPK type stuff. You're really watching this for Sandra Oh.
Yeah,
That's the reason you watch this, for her acting. Jodie Comer, I don't really know where she came from, pun intended. But she's good too. But it's a Sandra Oh show.
she she,
That's what you
she
watch
was
it for.
running around with that Idris Elba series when it was Luther.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she bumped around that a little bit, did some interesting things. Riverdale season 4. Riverdale is one of the few series on the CW that I don't actually watch, but it always struck me as interesting. They took the sort of characters from Archie, the Archie characters, and they set them in this sort of extremely dark
It was weird.
crime drama. And I grew
Yeah,
up, hey, with the Archies, and I'm like, what is the angle on that? But I never went and looked. But hey, we're at season 4, so they must be doing
right,
something right, right?
right.
With the Archies.
Could could we rip on Picard for a second?
Well,
Season one.
we will, but remember, you hated it more than me, and I and
Yeah,
I know that there are all kinds of problems with
yeah,
Picard. Um, One of the things that I did not realize until the end of the series, and it was sort of an off the cuff comment, and I did the math in my head. But Picard, Jean-Luc Picard, in that series, so this is season 1 of Picard. He is meant to be 95 years old. And somehow I know that he was supposed to be that this was years later
yeah,
and whatnot, and I think they even say it's something like 30 years later. But he's meant to be 95 in that series. And of
yeah,
course, Patrick Stewart, who plays him, I don't know exactly how old he is, but he's probably approaching his middle 80s, if
yeah.
I'm not
And
mistaken.
he's and the funny thing is, he's younger than William Shatner, who's what is Shatner, 88,
88.
and Shatner looks like he's 60,
Yeah.
and he spends all day on Twitter agitating people. That must keep him young.
But
I mean,
but look, go ahead and poke Picard. I will not.
so here's the thing. I mean, the my problem with Picard as a series is not that I love the idea that they wanted to resurrect the character, and he it gets into a lot of Federation politics and Romulan politics, and who's guilty and not guilty of the slaughter of Romulans on Mars, where they were given refuge, and there's all this crazy backstory to it. But it's the Romulan politics that drove me crazy,
Mm.
because it just and there's a whole data thing involved too, and I don't want to give any of it away, but it just felt hokey at a certain point to me, especially all that Romulan melodrama. It's just, oh, come on, it just it didn't. It's not the Star Trek I fell in love with, where there's a certain realism to it.
No,
They're
look,
just kind of beating the
I
barbed
will
wire.
not disagree with any of that. You have all of that sort of stuff going on, and then we have our swashbuckling action sequences in the show.
Yeah,
And because Patrick Stewart is in fact close to 80, and Picard is supposed to be 95, they have to assign all of those duties to much younger people.
yes,
So basically,
correct.
what we're really doing, and Commander Riker pops up, and they don't explain why Brent Spiner as Data, who is an
Yeah,
android, looks 50 years old. And now I suppose that we could say that Data wanted to, but blah blah blah. But there's all kinds of sort of construction problems to do with that stuff. And eventually, what you do is what you have is Patrick Stewart standing behind younger people as they kick ass, and
yeah.
and he runs around and punches buttons. Um,
And they bring back, what's her name, if 6 was 9
yeah,
or
seven
whatever
of
her name
nine,
is.
seven
Yeah,
of nine.
yeah, 7 of 9. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
who by the way still look fantastic. But
yeah. She does. She looks great.
nevertheless, you're not wrong about the Picard series. But what am I going to do? I'm going to end up watching the rest of it anyway. I just know I am. Mom, which premiered back in 2013 with Allison Janney and Anna Faris. Is still going strong. I think we have, what do we have here? Season 7 of
Yeah, season 7, the complete 7th season of Mom, which is so weird to me that this show has been on that long.
yet another Chuck Lorre series. Chuck Lorre,
Yeah,
I would have to go and look, but pretty soon now he's going to be one of those guys like spelling,
Oh, already he's already there.
yeah,
He's. I mean, it's
just
outrageous.
knocked
It's
off
outrageous.
8, 5, 6, 7 long running series. Most of them fairly silly, but there are these folks who come into the business and they
I know.
Carsey Werner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's Chuck Lorre.
Everything they touch is gold.
Yeah.
Could we talk about superheroes for a second too?
Ah.
So I got two. Um, both of them DC. Both of them basically kind of, well, one is the Arrowverse and the other one is kind of semi-connected to the Arrowverse. But my daughter is on a superhero kick,
Yeah.
like the mother of all superhero kicks. It started just realizing by watching some of the Marvel films on Disney Plus, and then now long story short, I have had to print out 100 pieces of paper with superheroes from Marvel and DC on them, all of whom she is memorizing, all of whom their powers she is memorizing. And it's an obsession, the likes of which I've never seen. It's crazy. So we're superhero nuts here right now, and she's creating her own superheroes, and there it is. But Legends of Tomorrow, the complete 5th season, is the one that has all of it's part of the 5-part crossover.
Oh yeah.
With the multiverse thing with Flash and Supergirl and all the rest. So all of those episodes are on this, as they are on the other seasons. So you don't have to worry about collecting them all. But if you prefer Legends of Tomorrow generally as a show, which I don't,
Yeah.
but others do, that is out there, and there are some fun episodes to this. I just the whole what was the Bridget was on the show. Quantum Leap. Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
Thank you. It feels just like a splashier version of Quantum Leap with too big of a cast.
and
Right?
look, I'm sitting here poking Legends of Tomorrow, yet I've watched every season of it. The
Yeah.
cast has completely changed in that series
Completely.
3 full times. And,
I know.
and at the moment, they're the only person still in that series that was in it at the beginning is the guy that plays Ray,
I know.
who was Brian. Was he Brian Singer's Superman? I think it was Brian Singer's Superman.
Yes. And he plays the Atom.
And he plays the Atom in this
Yeah.
series, and he's the only person from that original series who's still.
But he also gets to play Superman again.
Yeah.
In the crossover episodes,
which
is kind of
interesting
wild.
the way they do it, along with Tom Welling and everybody else who ever played Superman.
Yep. Now here's the one that I feel a little bit better about, and I was not I didn't know that Stargirl was a thing, but Stargirl,
kind of digging it.
Stargirl's a pretty fun show, right?
Kind of digging it.
I'm kind of digging it. So Stargirl, basically, she doesn't have powers, but she has the staff, which is basically the same staff as Starman, who of course does show up on the show. And it's this staff that lets you fly through space. It's kind of like the equivalent of the Green Lantern ring, except it's a big rod.
Yeah.
And you get to zap people with it, and you fly with it. Now, Stargirl did show up for a minute some seasons ago, I believe, on Legends of Tomorrow, but it was a different actress playing a different Stargirl with a less cool outfit. This is pretty cool, and a lot of other DC characters show up on this thing, and I think it's really fun.
It's kind of a throwback to even the small town that they're in and all that kind of stuff. It sort of resets it all. It doesn't reset it all, but it makes it feel like it's all reset and in the 1950s or something like that. It's not.
And again, it's from Berlanti. I don't know that it's necessarily part of the Arrowverse, but I'm sure that they will make it part of the Arrowverse in some way, even though Arrow doesn't exist anymore.
You got exactly. But you got Solomon Grundy, who's out of what's it, Batman? So some of these characters are crossover characters. More obscure characters.
Yeah.
There they are.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fun stuff on it. So good on them. They're getting the DC pantheon out there in a really big way.
I see you got Succession season 2.
Yeah.
And look, Succession. Pretty much everybody on the planet likes this more than me. I thoroughly enjoy some of the performances in Succession. Brian Cox, Kieran Culkin, a number of wonderful, Cherry Jones, a number of wonderful actors in this series. But the series itself, basically a bunch of absolutely terrible, dastardly people in this family, all vying for control of this empire, and the father who doesn't want to give it up but knows he's going to eventually have to give it up, and how the children are going after each other and him, And effectively, what is it? It's Dallas. It's these series that you and I, it's Dallas. It's Dynasty.
Sure it is.
It's Falcon Crest. It's Flamingo Road. And so it's not like we didn't have these, but somehow I don't know, they bug me now. The way we sort of, because we end up sort of like loving these terrible people. But I keep wanting there to be someone in one of these series who isn't disgusting. Bobby Ewing was a good guy, if you remember,
Yep. Oh yeah.
And Victoria Principal. They were the good guys. They were the good couple in that show. And then all of the heinous things went on around them. In these series, there are no good guys. Everyone is just
And
terrible.
that's what we get with things like Ozark too. That's kind of we're in that moment. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, but therein lies the difference. Anyway, Succession season 2.
We got a few things from Mill Creek. I want to make quick mention of to Royal Pains, the complete series from Mill Creek on DVD, not Blu-ray. This is one of those doctor shows. He's a doctor in the Hamptons. This is a little bit like Northern Exposure, except with a better place.
Yeah.
No offense to Alaska, but it's like he got a better gig. It's fine. It's basically about the characters more than the environment, to be honest. It's Magnum PI could take place in the Bahamas for all anybody cares, but the characters are what drive it. And I guess it's fine.
I love him.
Yeah,
he's one of those guys where you don't, if you didn't think about it, but he has been around for 1,000 years.
Yeah, I know.
Particularly as an actor. I mean, late '80s. He was in Caroline in the City, and just all of these great sitcoms and a few big movies. He was the guy in Practical Magic, and he popped up in all the Sex and the Cities back in the day. And and has had the lead in one or two television series. But he's just not the kind of guy whose name sticks in your head, but when you see his face and that curly hair, you're like, that guy from Ally McBeal, that guy from What Women Want, all that kind of stuff. Around forever, love him.
And then also from the Ultraman world on from Mill Creek, we have Ultra Q, the complete series, which is a 12-episode show kind of spun off from the Ultraman world about monster hunters. It's sort of like a Japanese kaiju Ultraman-y version of Night Stalker. I don't know any other way to put it. It's okay. It's a little bit cheesy. It's a little bit hokey, but that's kind of the charm of it. So I mean, if you're into the whole Ultraman thing. And then we also have Ultraman Ginga, the 2 different series and a movie and a special, all on one big mega freaking Blu-ray set. It's Ultraman Ginga the series, Ultraman Ginga S the series, Ultraman Ginga S the movie, and then Ultra Fight Victory. You know what? Plots don't matter. It's a whole lot of Ultramen doing a whole lot of fighting, and honestly, if you try to make too much out of the stories, you're going to get a headache. I can't keep track of all the different Ultramen at this point, or why they're different, or where they come from, or what they're doing to save what galaxy. None of it makes sense to me. As long as they're cool-looking outfits and they're shooting cool rays and stuff is blowing up, I'm on board.
Yeah.
There you go.
Did you watch the Frankie Drake Mysteries? I love that show.
That's a good show. That's a good show.
A Canadian show, and it's set in Toronto. The Canadians make a lot of these. They're really, really, really good. Murdoch Mysteries is another one. But this one's set in the 20s in Toronto, and I love that it's set in Toronto.
Yeah.
And Canadian things and Canadian issues, and Canadian politics, and it's just she's a detective. She's a subtle shog, and she has this a partner who's this young black woman, which is actually makes sense in the context of a Canadian show set in the 20s because it was a much more egalitarian society there, and the telephone is like a brand new thing, and it's all very Canada centric. Yet in the background, things that are going on in America are always sort of floating. They're always mentioning,
True.
The Americans,
yeah,
say something. All right, and it's just sort of so neat the way they do that, and in a way that we don't do it in the sort of equivalent programs. Anyway, the Frankie Drake Mystery is a lot of fun. Thoroughly enjoy that. This would be season 3.
Season 3, yeah. And then we've also got Burt Sugarman's The Soul of Midnight Special. That's 5 DVD set. if you don't know what the Midnight Special was, boy, you were
Yeah,
deprived.
you missed it.
Midnight Special was just the greatest thing in the 1970s. I mean, we grew up on it, and the people that would perform there, it was something to watch. You know, late at night. I remember it would come on what Friday nights? Was
Friday
it
night.
Friday or
It
Saturday?
was Friday night.
Friday nights.
Yeah.
I'd sit there and it was just the greatest thing. It was the greatest way to wrap out a week, you know, after school or whatever. It was just great music, great live music. Uh, it was a really really fun way to wrap out the week. And
The
this is
mix
a
up the way that he would put together those shows because I mean, rock and soul and R&B.
it was great.
This is the soul love. So you get
Yeah.
Brown, you get
So these are the soul
yeah,
performances from it, and you get James Brown
yeah.
obviously, and Gladys Knight and the Pips obviously, but also Curtis
Oh
Mayfield
yeah,
and Sly and the Family
Al
Stone and
Green.
Al Green, Barry White. You know, I mean, it's a joy to see some of these people
The
perform
Ohio
because you hear that.
players. Every band that I was in from the time that I was 8 years old until
Yeah.
I was 17 was basically a band pretending to be the Ohio players.
Oh,
With these brothers
it,
out of Sugarfoot and all those guys, Sly and the Family
yeah.
Stone, the Spinners. It's fantastic stuff, man.
It's really good. And the thing is, you know, we all hear this music on a regular basis on the radio or on your mix or whatever, but a lot of these acts were first and foremost performers,
Mm,
not just great musicians, not just great composers and songwriters, but
mm.
performers. You don't get them unless you get them on stage. And I got to say that about Barry White
Uh,
too. You know, I met Barry White once when he came through when I worked at Air France as a passenger service agent, you know, a million years ago, and he came through on his way to the Nice Jazz Festival with you know, his entire crew and band and like 800 pieces of luggage and instruments, and that was a big man.
They're
You know, Barry. I mean, not just not like fat, but like Barry
big.
White was like
Oh
six
yeah,
six five.
yeah.
He was like 6'5". He was an enormous. I mean, he was like he dominated the room. And the thing that was just so amazing about Barry White is as soon as that voice hits you and that smile hits you, you were in. I was gay for however long he was in the room.
Oh Barry.
It was amazing. It's just that he was so kind to everyone and so gregarious and just the warmest man. And it's just, you know, you get that when you see him perform, and you don't necessarily get it just listening. You
Yeah,
got to see him. You got to see it,
gotta
and
follow
it's
me.
just
I went to so many bear as you know, and then, it's so bizarre for me. For a moment, and you'll remember this. I was on this film review show, this PBS based film review show,
yeah.
and the producer of that show shot it out of his home. His home happened to be the last home that Barry White lived in,
No kidding.
and he literally bought that house from Barry White back in the 90s. Mike Freeman is the producer's name, and so for about a season of this PS show that I was on 5 or 6 times, I would go to Barry White's house and hang out in Barry White's living room and shoot
Wow.
this show. And it was and even then, this is only a few years ago. He was still getting mail addressed to Barry White.
No
And
kidding.
he's like, hey, why would I put a stop to that? That's fantastic. That's just the nuttiest thing in the world. California, you gotta love this town. Rick and Morty season.
Yeah.
Look, I watched a season or two of Rick and Morty. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Kind of funny. It got a little mean to me after a while,
It's kind of mean. Yeah.
and I was like, you know what, this cartoon has an attitude. But lots of people love Rick and Morty season 4, which I imagine
Adult Swim.
Adult Swim out of Adult Swim. Where I imagine that comes with some fairly fun
Nope.
crap.
Nope.
Nothing,
No extras.
really?
Nothing. Nothing at all on it. Nothing at all on it.
Frankly, I consider that
But
rude.
yeah, it is kind of rude. But I'll tell you what also has nothing on it. There's a segue. Is the complete first season of Prodigal Son, which I took time out to watch because I remember that it looked interesting from all the promos and whatnot. So got it on DVD on Blu-ray and checked it out. And I'll tell you, I think there's a really interesting future to this show.
Mhm.
I want to see really where it goes. But it's about a criminal psychologist who is the son of a serial killer.
Oh, the
And right,
reverse, kind of a Dextery kind of thing.
it's really that, and that's the whole thrust of it, is how being the son of a serial killer has turned him into this great criminal psychologist. But of course, there's a lot of baggage that goes with it as well. And Lou Diamond Phillips plays the detective that he works with, and there's a lot of other really interesting supporting characters here. But it is from a psychological angle, it's a very well written show. and it opens up a lot of really interesting questions that I think future seasons should be able to answer very, very compellingly. The writers have set themselves up with a wonderful canvas, and I think there's a lot to do with this show. It's again, it's kind of still it's still in its man, I cannot
I'm
talk
not.
today.
I do
It
that all the time.
it's
So I'm not,
formative stages. But first season of Prodigal Son is very, very promising. Let's do like two more, and then we'll wrap it into the Lee Renee interview.
okay, the Good Fight, which I know a lot of people really love. I didn't follow that one out of The Good Wife. I probably should have followed it out of The Good Wife. You know, I did not realize. I know Michelle King, Robert King, creators of that show. Phil Alden Robinson is one of the creators of The Good Fight.
Yeah,
I did not
yeah.
know that. I don't know why I didn't know that, but it just never. Anyway, Christine Baranski. Delroy Lindo. I'm told it's a very good, sharp series, particularly apropos, post the sort of Me Too movement, and did a
Yeah.
lot of the commentary. We're looking at season 5. What are we looking at?
Season four. This is season 4
of
yeah.
Fight.
Yeah, season 4. It's a great cast. I mean, Delroy Lindo and Christine Baranski. That's powerhouse right there. That's some powerhouse stuff. So good on them. And then let's do Balthazar season 2, which comes from ITV Studios, more famously known more recently for Downton Abbey, but they do a lot of other stuff with ITV. And Balthazar, now in its second season, is basically a variation on Quincy. Or even what was the other medical examiner show that we had momentarily for a minute there in the 90s? Bones. Yeah, there've been a few of them. Anyway, yeah, I mean, you always can do a lot with these things. There's always something a little bit gruesome and morbid about the whole subject of being a medical examiner, even though if you talk to them, it's a really clinical job and it's not very exciting, and it's very scientific. It's just it's not a lot of intrigue, but television has to make everything intriguing. So in this case, they really do what you could only do on a European show, and the backdrop for the show is, of course, is Parisian. It's a French series produced by ITV. So because it is French, because it's set in Paris, you wind up having a lot of sort of the residue of the Middle Ages always kind of creeps in, right? Because who knows what's buried around Paris. Who knows what's going to be lying around from hundreds and hundreds of years ago? Yeah. So you mix a little bit of the ugliness of the Middle Ages with the ugliness of the modern ages, and you find where they intersect, and you wind up with a pretty sharp show. Now in its second season, Balthazar, and of course it's he has to be very, very sexy. And he is, but it's yeah. I want to see where it goes further.
What was the other one you were thinking? There was Harrow, which was the British one,
yeah,
with that guy, and you mentioned Quincy.
And there's the Examiner. Was it called the Examiner, or I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who the actress was that was on it. It feels like a.
That's why I thought
it's been a while.
Bones, but yeah, that's not what you were talking about. You were talking about something else.
I'm talking about something else.
Yeah.
Talking about something else. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Gosh, we'll have to look for it. Gods at DigiGods.com. Gods at CineGods.com. Email us. And check us out at the Facebook page. And now we're going to go into our interview with Lee Renee, author of Mitzi of the Ritz, and beautifully written novel, really well researched. And we will dovetail right into that right now. Our interview with Lee Renee. So we're trying to expand more and more during the pandemic period to cover things and cover people that we otherwise might not necessarily get to. And we have got a tremendous Hollywood novel and novelist to talk about today. The book is Mitzi of the Ritz, written by Lee Renee, who joins us right now. This is not a lot of people go out and write novels about old Hollywood, and Lee Renee deserves all the credit in the world. This is a beautifully researched, very, very compelling novel that takes place right around the transition period of silent films and sound, and it's just a wonderful backdrop for these incredibly colorful characters. Tim, thanks for being with us here, and a big welcome to Lee Renee.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this.
Well, it's a
So,
perfectly fantastic book. I really, really love it. I love your lead character, your young heroine. Uh, when the book begins, she's in New York. She's a member of this sort of Jewish family, and someone has just passed, but she's looking to get the hell out of town. Tell us where you came up with this wonderful story that puts this heroine right smack dab in Hollywood.
Well, it was interesting because I actually met Mitzi. She's passed away, but she had, at the age of 14, had gone to a very prestigious college in New York. She was head of her class. Um, and then later on, she wanted to be a singer, but her father didn't want her to. But later on, because of the depression, she started singing on the radio. A lot of people we wouldn't think of had to started their careers in the during the depression because they needed jobs, and they started show business careers. So she told me all these stories, and then I just incorporated them into the book, and it was a lot of fun. Her name was Ethel Boot. She was extremely progressive in her politics, very Jewish, and she told me all kind of stories of growing up in New York, being a child prodigy, and then also a singer. So that was
how
interesting.
how much of this of the story is kind of percentage wise fact and fiction, or is it just kind of too hard to sort of separate at this point? Because you do such a wonderful job. Nobody would ever imagine that there's even a bit of fiction in this, and yet you really kind of bring it all together in a very fluid and elegant way.
Well, I don't know how you can, what the percentage is, but I did use a lot of the my accumulated research because I had the privilege of being on every single major movie lot. I even went to the Columbia lot before it was torn down. So I saw all of them. I also knew old movie people. As a child, I grew up around a woman who had played maid roles during in Hollywood, and she had gone blind because of Klieg light, which afflicted a lot of people. You know, the Klieg lighting that they use.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it would blind people, and there was nothing to protect her. So she told us stories when I was a little girl of working in all these movies, and just my interest in movies of the early 30s because it was an interesting time in Hollywood because the inception of sound hit the same year as the Great Depression.
Mm.
And thousands of theaters around the country closed because they didn't have the money to wire for sound. So people, only the big studios that owned their own theaters were able to continue. And so I wanted to talk about that. That it was a business. It really was a business, and I wanted to bring that out and just talk about what it must have been like and during the Depression to go to these big theaters downtown, which I've seen all of them because when I grew up in Los Angeles, they were all working theaters,
All up and down Broadway,
all of
the facades of which are still there.
them. Yeah,
If
Yeah.
you live in Los Angeles very often now, they're anything from flea markets to jewelry shops. But
yeah.
those facades are all there. One or two, the Orpheum, I think, has been brought back. You guys are both Los Angeles Hollywood natives. I'm from the middle of the country, St. Louis, and in your book, you do this section that I particularly adore when Mitzi and her sister travel from New York to Los Angeles on a train. And it's just a beautiful train ride, rendered in some lovely prose. Talk about that train trip that you put them on across the country. These two young women.
Well, I did a lot of research with that. You couldn't go directly across the country um, by train in the 20s and 30s. You had to switch in Chicago, and they had just built this big train depot in Chicago, and they get onto the train, And I do talk about what it was like for them meeting this young Pullman porter who becomes a big part of the story. And all of these uh, personalities, movie personalities, because remember, there wasn't flight. This is the way you traveled. You traveled by train. And if you were a person of color, very often, and you had money, enough money, you rented your own little car because you weren't allowed to mingle with the rest of the people. And I had to bring that up too. So, and I just wanted to show what it was like uh, travel by train. Must have been fabulous if you had enough money. And so it was a lot of fun writing that because I had to get all these stories from Pullman porters.
And see, that's one of the things I really like about the book is that it's not a rose-colored glasses view of the past. It sort of looks at it through a prism that says we glamorize all of this stuff about old Hollywood, but it had its dark edges too, and it had this really kind of unsavory mix of sour and sweet and good and bad. And unless you really delve into like a lot of the old Hollywood scandals and murders and the secret lives of a lot of these people, you don't sort of necessarily get a sense of that. Talk for a bit about how extensively you went to research these characters, and are any of these characters, are any of the fictional characters based on anyone else in particular? Are there any famous people that are kind of hiding in the shadows?
Yeah, well, there is a black character, Buster Sweet, who is based on an actor named Willie Best.
Oh,
Who,
Willie.
yeah, Willie Best was a huge character actor in the 30s and 40s. And then he unfortunately was caught in a drug bust and it destroyed his movie career. But he was an actor who was kind of well, he wasn't really step and fetch it, but like one step above. I combined him with another actual character, Sunshine Sammy Morrison, who had started off as a child actor. He worked for Hal Roach and he worked with Snub Pollard and he did all these silent films. As a teenager, he did a little work. And then after World War II, he went into doing something else because he wasn't interested in acting. But he was actually considered the first movie star, black movie star, because as a child, everybody liked him. They loved Sunshine Sammy. And he had a big career. He worked with Harold Lloyd. So I combined these two characters, someone who was a child performer and then became a real actor, an adult actor, and was able to transition in the movie system. I have a photographer, a young photographer, Rose, who I modeled on Ruth Harriet Louise, who was the head photographer at MGM, the head portrait photographer at the age of 22. And she was finally fired and they replaced her with George Harrell. And she was still in her 20s when that happened, but now
Wow.
it's considered his equal. These are people you don't know about, but who know movies know about her. She was Greenberg. Was her actual name. She was Jewish. No, sorry, Goldstein. Her brother was Mark Sandridge, who did all the RKO all the RKO
No
credits
kidding.
there. Mark Sandridge was really Mark Goldstein, and he was
No
Harry
kidding.
Louise's brother. And so it was interesting reading about her. By the way, just throwing this out, Ruth Harriet Louise was the first woman to do a glamour photograph of a black um, artist. So she was just ahead of her time. But she
Wow.
found herself out of a job in the late 20s, the late 30s. So it was just too bad. But I wanted to use those characters. I also have a character model after Ida Kuverman, who was a she worked at MGM. She was the right hand person to Louis B. Mayer, and I used her as a model for one of the characters. So And then the other characters, David Stein, who's the romantic interest in it. I used Irving Thalberg, although Irving Thalberg was different, different character. But I had a lot of fun, writing David Stein because I wanted to show a strong, handsome young Jewish man who is also a businessman and who realized that in order to really be successful in Hollywood as a businessman, if you worked at a studio, the studio had to own theaters. So I created a man who came from a family of theater owners who did a deal with a small studio and then made that studio a bigger studio.
It's great.
So
Yeah.
it's all so interesting. I have so many questions about so many things. There's a lot of music in the novel. It's lyrically written, but there's a whole lot of music in the background. The wonderful clubs and jazz. Talk a bit
Oh
about
yeah.
how music and the music performers informed the time and what it is that's happening in your narrative.
Well, it
And the
was,
clubs too.
Oh,
yeah,
those clubs. Some of which, so
Yeah.
many of which are gone.
yeah, they're all gone. But the issue was there was a town called Sherman, and it was unincorporated, so they didn't use the LAPD. It became West Hollywood, and it was loaded with casinos and illegal gambling and nightclubs. And because of the fact it was unincorporated and didn't use the LAPD, they could do this stuff with impunity. They could do whatever they want. So I put most of the action in West Hollywood, which had been Sherman. And we forget West Hollywood was loaded at that time with small movie studios. They were all over West Hollywood. So many of them all of them have gone under, except, you know,
Well, the remnants of Warner Brothers, that Formosa lot over
yes,
there is still there,
yeah,
where the Formosa Cafe and whatnot
yeah,
was. Yeah.
yeah. And so I just used what I knew, like the Chateau Marmont was originally started uh, as an apartment, and no one could afford to live there, so they made it into a hotel in 1931. So I used that as one of the characters in West Hollywood. Um, it must have been very beautiful from what I've read. West Hollywood was very beautiful, very quiet, and except at night, then people went bananas. But it was very interesting to do that research.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask you, I know that your character, the person that your lead character is based on, is a woman of Jewish descent, and thus Mitzi is Jewish. But of course, the Jewish people were prominent in positions of power all over Hollywood. Yet there was still this thing of where sometimes they tried to pass, they tried to hide the
Oh
fact
yeah,
that they
they
were
would
Jewish.
say,
Talk a little bit about that weird sort of dichotomy. The bosses are Jews, but the actors are pretending not to be.
yeah. Well, I mean, the fact that Ruth Harriet Louise and Mark Sandridge had to give up their actual names were part of it. I used a number of Jewish performers who kept Jewish in their private lives, but we didn't really know them as Jews. Probably the most famous one was Sylvia Sidney, who was a young actress at that time, very beautiful. They didn't talk about her Jewish roots. I think she changed her name. And there were a number of people who had Jewish names, like Ricardo Cortez, who was a big star at that time.
Mm.
His name was uh, they called him Ricardo Cortez, but his name was something Jacob Muntz or something like that. I can't remember. It just was a reality. There was a great deal of anti-Semitism, and Jewish. The big owners of the studios, with one exception, were all Jewish. Fox, Daryl Zanuck was not Jewish. He was the only one at that time, and they were aware of the a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment in the United States. Many of them converted, not all of them, but some converted. They lived relatively secular lives. And so that was an interesting character, interesting to look at. I'm sorry, interesting character, interesting to look at. I used Harry Cohn as one of the characters. And I also I met a lady who died. Her name was Edith Fellows. She was in the original Pennies from Heaven. She
Mm.
was a child
Yeah.
prisoner. She she was just a gracious lady, and she told me all kind of stories about working in Colombia, what it was like for a child performer there. It was just fascinating that the minute you reached puberty, you were didn't have a job. She had lovely things to say about Harry Cohn, who's normally considered the son
Wow.
bitch of all time. Yeah.
Yeah, that you don't hear good stories about Harry Cohn too often.
No, but she just adored him. There were a few people who really adored him. Maureen O'Hara liked him, and a few other actresses really liked him. But she said he protected her against um, from her grandmother, who took all her money.
Hmm.
And we forget, even though there was a Coogan law that still didn't um, protect all of their assets. So Harry Cohn took her mother aside and said, I could easily make sure that she doesn't work at all. And I can't do anything now because you are her mother. But the minute she turns 18, the gravy train stops, and I'll work with her. You will not be allowed on this lot. And she said he saved her life.
Mm.
So
Wow.
that was her belief. And she also said that, which has been written about, he used to walk around the studio every day because it was a fairly small studio and he could do it. But she said a lot of people liked him. He would visit, he knew everybody's name. So she gave a completely different portrait of Harry Cohn. And so that's why I was able to use a character based on that in my book. So.
Based on your research, what is the greatest myth or misperception about old Hollywood that we have when we look back through our nostalgia?
I think that people talk about the sordid part. They don't realize that those performers worked 24/7. There was no Screen Actors Guild. Screen Actors Guild started in 1933 because the studios were working them so hard. They
Hmm.
would work forever, forever. When Boris Karloff made Frankenstein, one day he worked for 25 hours straight, a day and 1 hour straight. And if you were an actress and they wanted you to dye your hair blonde, you had to do your hair blonde. You had absolutely no choice in the roles. There was nobody to stand up for you. And it didn't mean that the people who owned the studios were bad. This is the way it was their studio and that's the way they wanted it. And so I would say there was, there were uprisings in the studio system. People really, if you were with a big studio, they really loved it, but they also were aware the studio could get rid of you at any time, which is another reality.
Mm.
If you didn't behave, the studio, was tootsie goodbye, quite literally. And
Wow.
I, wanted to put that in there, and just the reality of what it was like, specifically during the Depression, when people were starving to death, not starving to death, but starving. And it was the only thing that they had. There was no television, there were no computers, there were no computer gaming. Going to the movies, it was either the movies or the radio, and that was it. And so that's one of the reasons why these movies theaters were so sumptuous and so beautiful, because it was a true experience. And
Y-
I think. Go ahead, Tim.
These sometimes we forget when we look back at these old movies, particularly ones that had these young starlets in them, just how young they were.
yeah,
Some of them had the stage mothers or whatnot, but a lot of them, even the ones who came out on their own in the midst of the the Depression with nothing. Teenagers, girls, really. They were girls, not women at all. Girls.
I
Talk a
don't
little bit
know.
about all of these girls
I
coming
don't.
to Hollywood and
Yeah.
sometimes becoming prey to, go.
Well, Ida Lupino was called the baby vamp. She was doing uh, playing adult roles from the age of 14. Loretta Young did her first adult role at the age of 14 in a silent, in an MGM silent, opposite Lon Chaney, who was the big star of that period. There were a lot of reasons for early on using younger girls because they looked good under that harsh light,
Mm,
because that light would age the average woman in no time. And they had horrible makeup at that time, that panchromatic makeup. And then later on, Max Factor was able to work with the studios and change it. So, and Max Factor, of course, was Jewish too. And he had this huge, huge, huge impact on the way people looked. But there are a lot of stars and a lot of women in that period. Um, the tap dancing actress, I can't remember her name, who worked in the 40s in a lot of musicals. Suddenly her name escapes me.
Ginger Rogers.
No, she was brunette. Oh gosh, golly gee, I can't remember her. She was 13 and she was doing leading lady parts.
Mm.
So I can't remember. I'm sure it's a um, I'll think of her later on. But
Yep.
so many actresses were really, really, really young, and they were doing these parts. If Jean Harlow was a teenager when she started acting in Hollywood, and
Hmm.
she allowed them to do whatever they wanted to her hair because she wanted to work. She wasn't poor, but she wanted to work, and she understood what was going through. You think of some of those big stars who did the transition from silent to the
Mm.
sound era. Um, they were also very young. A lot of them were extremely young. So we just forget. These were young women. Very often, uh, more powerful men took advantage of them. But it was during the Depression, and they wanted to work, and it was essential for them to work. So we have to. I I tip my hat to them because I realized what it was like, what it must have been like.
So when people read your book, and I encourage anybody who has any kind of love for the history of the movies to definitely pick it up. You can grab it at Amazon, either Kindle or in physical, actual, will not wear out the battery book form. I know that's a anomaly to people now, but it's kind of nice to know that your book's not going to run out of battery when you're reading it, and it's
Mhm.
such a page turner. But it really is, it's so much of a Hollywood history as well as a great story. What do you think? You raise a great point that back then it was the only game in town. There were no video games. There was no television. There was no anything other than radio at a certain point. Movies, that was it. That was, it was affordable. And here we are during this pandemic, and I think people are dying to go to the movies again when the theaters open up. And I think people are going to want movies to be different than they were before. They're going to want them to be bigger and more glamorous. I think that hunger might be there again. What lessons do you think today's Hollywood can take from the Hollywood of old?
The fact that the Hollywood of old actually looked at what was going on around the country, which is something I don't think that people do today. They looked at the trends and they were able to follow them. They were able to follow them. One of the things I thought was interesting was when um, when sound became the big deal and every studio slowly but surely transitioned, there were two things that were going on. MGM and other major studios assumed that silent films would last and that they would only use talkies in musicals. And then they realized everybody wanted talking pictures. They made musicals, and musical pictures at first were not big. They were failing at the box office. And then later on, brilliant men, brilliant choreographers, and brilliant directors changed that, and everybody wanted movie musicals. But it was a slow process. But the people who owned theaters actually listened to what the public wanted, and they realized this is what they want, and that's what we're going to give them.
It took them a while to sort of get their minds wrapped around it. There was all
Yeah,
that, as it always does every time the technology changes.
yeah.
But there was a while when the studios would make silent movies out of movies with sound.
Yeah.
They would take the sound off,
Well,
and
they would make two versions, and
yeah,
they would make a version synced for sound, and then another version silent that could be shown in silent theaters that couldn't afford to transition.
yeah,
And it was not only it was the right speed, so it wasn't all jerky or anything.
yeah.
My mother saw the original Dracula as a silent movie. She didn't see the sound movie because that's what her theater presented. So they continued making silent movies until 1932, 33 for these small theaters that couldn't afford to transition. And it was a very, very interesting time for a lot of people, and very hard, very, very hard, because they had to completely change all the cameras. So the cameras were much larger,
Mm,
louder, but
mm,
they couldn't be allowed to. You couldn't hear the roar of the camera over when you were filming. So they had to work on that, and then they had to figure out this and that. And for a while, sound technicians were ruling the roost. They were the ones who would come on to a set, watch something, and if they didn't like the sound, they were the ones who would you know stop filming, not the director. It was a real mess for a while until they finally worked it out. But I would say that that's the most important thing. But they kept working until they figured it out. And then during the Depression, people had a place to go. They'd go to these, if you were in a big city, big movie houses, and you could see something for 25 cents, and it would just absolutely make your make your day. And people would go to the movies sometimes 3 times a week. You know,
See, and I miss that. I think we could go back to that. I think people would be happy with something like that again.
I just don't know. I just don't know. I think that we're going to have some sort of hybrid, because
Yeah,
I talk to people who are afraid to go to movie theaters, and I, you know, they no longer are in the movie habit. That's what's scary to me, because the theaters are closed, and then you go, the next week it's closed again. What are you supposed
yeah,
to do? It
mm.
just is
yeah,
horrible. It used to be, this is where you would go, and people would just love to go to a nice movie theater and you know uh, see their friends and get dressed up, and it was
yeah.
really a social. It was a social thing. You did it because you were overjoyed to do it, but
Yeah,
I don't know what's
it's a
going on.
challenge. It's a challenge. They got to make, if you build it, they will come, I think is what I would say. But you got to make movies people want to see. You have
It,
to make
it
really good
there,
movies.
there is a thing that I think that though that happened in the culture, and so we transitioned to 2 or 3 times, particularly if you're talking about the 30s and 40s, probably on up into the 50s. Going to the movies was an event. People literally got dressed up, suits and ties. If you watched the old
Oh
Lucy
yeah.
shows, going to the movies was as important as going to the live theater. So it was like this real event. And then by the time you get to say my childhood, me and Wade's childhood. For one thing, a lot of movies are being produced for this new thing called the teenager, a phrase that didn't exist until after World War II. So you have all of these movies that are genre films, and movies become an activity of youth. There were still adults who went to the movies. Of course, there were grown up movies being made, but the movies became a thing, an activity of the youth. And even as we grew up, we took we the cinema that I went to as a teenager, a young 20s person. I was trying to engage in sophisticated cinema, foreign films, sophisticated dramas. The sort of cinema of my youth drifted away. I'm not sure that any of that evolution has an opportunity to happen anymore. Kids grow up, they're watching whatever. Wait, you have a daughter. You know this better than or anyone. And I don't. I'm not sure that moment is there anymore for kids to sort of go through their cinema existence as children, as teenagers, as young adults, as adults, all spent time with the movies. Now I think they just live in that spot on their phone.
Well, I think that you're right. It's interesting because when I was a little girl, every Christmas, my parents and I would go to the movies, and I wore my Christmas outfit, and my brother wore his Christmas outfit to the movies. We were expected to be dressed up, and we would go to the movie theater. It was just something holy, and an usherette would take us to our assigned seats. I remember in the 60s when I was a teenager, I saw a movie called Thoroughly Modern Millie. And I
Mm.
went to Hollywood to see it. And I remember the girl I went with, we were in high school. We went and got all dressed up, and my mother took us to the bus stop and everything. And having an usher take you to your seat. And everybody was so respectful and nicely dressed. You didn't eat food in the movie in the middle of the theater. You just weren't allowed to do it then. The theaters were immaculate. The only thing you could get when I was a kid was maybe candy if you brought it in, or you could buy candy and popcorn, and that was it.
Mm.
So it was a special treat. By the way, I remembered the actress I was talking about was Ann Miller. Ann Miller
Oh yes,
Ah,
started playing adult roles when she was 13.
I did not know that.
Yeah, she was, if you go back, and no one believed her until they looked at her actual birth certificate. She said it was the Depression. She'd come from Texas with her mother, and these were the roles. The minute she hit puberty, she had to play adult roles, and that
Wow.
was the reality of it.
Well,
So
my wife actually met Ann Miller working on Mulholland
Mulholland.
Drive.
Yeah, she is a Mulholland.
Yeah, she's in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, which my wife worked on. My wife was an executive on that, and said she was just the most lovely lady, and that may even be her last movie. So we kind of come full circle there.
I think it was her last movie. She
Yeah.
was kind of she was from a different era because she said I didn't want to do movies with sex, and then she ended up doing Mount Mulholland Drive, which was no. Um, she was a gracious. I met her at the Directors Guild. She was a very gracious lady, and but she was part of the old Hollywood, and she was forever grateful because she knew how hard it was, how difficult it was for so many people, and so many people didn't make it. It was just a difficult time.
Her first film, uncredited, Anne of Green Gables,
Yeah,
1934. She was born in 23, so
yeah.
there she is,
Wow.
all of 11 years old.
And then
Uh,
she hit puberty, and then after that, she was playing adults.
yep.
And she finally, yeah, in a lot of movies, she was playing opposite adult men. So it was just, and she persisted, and that's what it is. You find it's persistence, and that's the way it was in that period. You persisted no matter what, you made it. I think that period in a movie history, the beginnings in the 1900s, and then when people moved to Hollywood and would make movies, that's a fascinating period. But it was just
It is.
hard work, blood, sweat, and tears. People would injure themselves all the time because they didn't have doubles. And it was just rough for everyone. But if you succeeded, think of the wonderful things that happened for you.
Mm.
Well, the novel is Mitzi of the Ritz. You can get it at Amazon.com, Kindle, or just good old fashioned non electronic book. I recommend the book. I think there's nothing like a physical book just sitting on the shelf. And when civilization ends, you won't need to worry about batteries. So the novel again is Mitzi of the Ritz by Lee Renee. Lee, thank you so much for talking with us, and we wish you all the very, very best with the novel.
Thank you so very much for having me.
It's a beautiful novel, Lee, wonderfully written. The prose is just delectable. Good work.
Thank you so very much.